Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. I'm here today with Darren Woolley. Darren, welcome back to the pod.
Thanks, James. I always enjoy our time on the pod.
Yeah, very much looking forward to today's conversation. So Darren Woolley is founder and CEO of Trinity P3. Trinity P3 is a marketing management consulting company founded in Australia, but now has offices in Sydney, but London and New York as well. Trinity P3 in any given year will work with a very, very large group of both Australia and the world's largest advertisers. Earlier this year, Trinity P3 published its inaugural State of the Pitch report. And as a result, Darren, I wanted to get you onto the pod to discuss the report and essentially how marketers can run better pitches. So I think a really good starting point would be to discuss how the report was put together, what the process was, and I guess the why of all the information.
Yeah, James, it's a really good point because since COVID, or probably arising out of the pandemic, we've seen advertising agencies globally increasingly complain about the pitch process, and how unfair it is, how wasteful it is, and particularly, and if we look to the UK with their pitch positive pledge, the negative impact that pitching is increasingly having on agency staff, both for their mental and physical health. Lots of conversations, lots of talking, but one of the things we noticed is it was all anecdotal. There was no actual documentation or quantification of where things were going wrong. So what we're hearing is lots of complaints, but not a lot of detail into how big a problem are these individual things. So that's what motivated us to do the State of the Pitch research, which literally, from our perspective, was combining all of the issues that we'd heard anecdotally and capturing those in the least number of questions possible. We worked with a market researcher, to make sure that the questions were framed in a way that weren't going to bias the outcome one way or the other. And so we're able to then put that in market for a 6-month period. It ran from the 1st of July last year to the 31st of December. And the reason for that is we wanted to get the largest possible cross-section without being in market all the time.
Yeah.
We got 77 pitches, individual pitches reported on. Now, of course, this is from the agency's perspective, but I think that's really important because it's not often that agencies feel empowered in the pitch process to give the marketers feedback on how well or how poorly the pitch was run or how it could be run better. And so there's two parts to this research. The first is capturing what are the pain points that are in the marketplace for the agencies that are pitching, but more importantly, giving marketers, quantifiable feedback on where things are going right, but more importantly, where things are going wrong and could improve. So we consolidated the data, we analyzed that from various aspects and put that together as a report, which is both qualitative and quantitative, because you'll see in there's narrative from the individual agencies, but also interpretation of the data from our perspective as pitch consultants for more than 20 years.
Yeah, nice one. Yeah, speaking from experience, I don't think we've ever once been asked for feedback as an agency owner, right? In terms of our perspective on how a pitch was run or what could have been done better or what, conversely was really good about that particular process. So I think it's nice to be heard, Darren, as an aspect, putting my agency owner hat on. You at the time when the report came out, there was a quote from you, which is, marketers are boiling the ocean in their search for the right agency. And that, for me, that'd be a nice place to kind of jump into some of the findings from the report.
Okay, well, the first one is that the pitch is still run the same way it was 30 years ago. You could say that the Mad Men era of pitching exists today. What is very different today is a number of things. The first is that back then you would appoint an agency as what was known as the agency of record. You're probably looking at a 3 to 5 year contract. There was a sizable amount of money. In today's market, the first thing is that it's much more about projects. And what we're seeing is that there could be projects from $50,000 in value right up to millions of dollars in value, but the pitch process is exactly the same. And so what we're seeing is that there's completely out of kilter the level of investment in time and effort that agencies need to make in the pitch process for a vast range of very different paybacks. And so that's this boiling the ocean
Mm.
is the first problem. The second one is that back in 30 years ago, you had a creative agency and a media agency. Today, you might have PR, you'll have SEO, or digital agencies. You know, the number of skills and capabilities that are actually required can exist within specialist agencies, but often at the top end of the market, the very large advertisers and small are looking to consolidate as many of those.
Mm.
So, what we also noticed is there could be up to 11 different capabilities required from an agency to be successful in a pitch process. And yet, that old fashioned, speculative creative, here's a brief, go and show us what you can do, doesn't actually test any of those. It
Mhm.
tests maybe a handful, but it doesn't actually test the agency's ability across all those capabilities. And so is not fit for purpose anymore.
Yeah, I think found that quite interesting in the report. I think the number was for four different kind of disciplines or capability areas was the biggest number. And the majority were four or more, which I found quite
Yeah.
interesting. You kind of think of it as being creative or media buying or something like that, but the majority of the pitches had four or more capabilities built in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just the nature of the complexity of the world we live in. Marketing today is not making a TV ad and just running the hell out of it. There
Mm.
are so many consumer touch points that marketers are expected to be across. And whether they're going to have a range, a village of specialist agencies that they then need to make work together, or they're consolidating as much as possible into two or three agencies that are offering those. It's a very different selection process to the one that just says, "Oh, I want the agency that comes up with the best TV idea."
Yeah.
You know, I don't think there's a marketer around. Perhaps, government will occasionally appoint an agency to come up with a TV ad. Is about the only time that that approach is legitimate.
Yeah. Interesting. I do later on want to talk about how marketers, how they should be thinking for some of the smaller kind of scopes, 50 grand, 100 grand type work versus the larger ones. But before we kind of get into that, and you'll obviously have a perspective on this, who should be running the process? Because obviously you've got processes where Darren's smiling for those that are listening and not watching, where you'll have procurement running it, you'll have marketers running it, you'll have external consultants assisting like Trinity P3. But I guess that probably is a pretty important consideration before you start looking at how many agencies and how to pick them and what the process should be.
Yeah, look, and I'm not going to say that you should get a consultant, because I actually don't think that that's right for every pitch. If you have a very large, complex selection process and you don't have either the resources or the time to do it, then I would suggest you look at getting some sort of professional assistance in designing and managing that process. But for a large number of advertisers that want to run their own pitch, I think there are some base lessons and some considerations, extensive range of considerations that they should be going through, and they probably not, because let's be honest, the average marketer may run one pitch per year or
Mm.
one every 3 years. It's very difficult to become an expert when you're doing something so infrequently. You may consider it, or your CEO may consider that it's part of your job as a marketer, but it's not a capability that's easy to build, expertise in,
Yep.
because it is so infrequent. And even then, between pitches, it could be quite different what the requirements are or what the success looks like. You might be running something for a small, uh, what are they called? Influencer, you know, project right through to a multi-million-dollar media uh, process, and you need to have very different attributes for each of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And how, in terms of for a marketer to get the best outcome, what are your observations with that kind of procurement versus kind of marketing led approach?
So procurement have a really important part to play in that process, and that's really around risk mitigation, due diligence, and corporate governance to make sure it is fair, and a commercial oversight that is hopefully not driven by savings, but truly does look at value. So that's
Mm.
if you have access to a procurement capability, they would be the things that you would engage them for. You know, due diligence and governance, commercial oversight, and risk mitigation. What are the potential things that could go wrong? Marketers have at their disposal the ability to run very good pitches. What they don't often have is either the time personally or the resources within their marketing team to do it well. And that's always a big issue because, if you go into a pitch process, depending on what that process is, it can be very easy. But, if you're sticking with the standard one that seems to get churned over again and again, you really are looking at a 3-month process, potentially that can take anywhere between 500 to 1,000 hours of
Mm.
extra work for the people involved, collectively,
Yeah.
for the people involved. I don't know many marketers that will say to me on a daily basis, "Oh, yeah, I've got an extra 4 hours each day to run a pitch."
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. Everyone's already stressed for time. So running a pitch can be incredibly difficult and leads to one of the big areas that agencies particularly complain about, and that is pitches that drag on and on and on because none of the people are available or are always incomplete because there's never the feedback, guidance, or direction of what the agency should be doing. And both of those are usually underpinned by a marketing team that is already time pressured or time pulled.
Yeah. Do- And it's interesting. Like, I definitely, I can think of two rocket clients, one where procurement, I think, dealt with us in exactly the way you just described, right? Where to me, it wasn't about driving, eking every single last dollar out of us and screwing us down. It was genuinely going through a process to find, if I was a marketer, to find the best marketing partners to help that client. And then dealing with another very high profile client where procurement just came in and it was, into my view, not getting the best outcome for the business, but just trying to get a commodity as cheap as possible. Like, do you see, generally speaking, procurement working in that kind of um, productive fashion to work with marketing to get the right agency partner? Or do you find it is a function where marketers are kind of getting almost screwed out of the best partner for their needs?
It's interesting, James. There's actually a number of different scenarios that we see play out. The first one is the marketer that doesn't have enough budget for what they actually want. And so procurement becomes a convenient bad cop that is given by the marketer the job of getting the price down.
Mm.
Now that happens, that is, marketers do not necessarily want to have those tough relationship damaging conversations with the agency in a pitch. So procurement's convenient to do that. Then in very large organizations, you'll often find there'll be a procurement team who are actually KPI'd on savings across the board in everything they do. That is their number one thing. Unfortunately, when they get to marketing, savings can often come at the expense of efficacy. So in those situations, you have to be very careful, that the procurement has not been uh, held account to deliver savings because, of course, if it's your job or theirs, they're going to look after their own job.
Mm.
Then the third area is where procurement is mandating pitches. And it's very much that the marketer is not even a partner with procurement. They're being told that, and usually because of legal or finance, procurement is being told, well, that contract's been in place for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. We must go to market to make sure that it's the best.
Mm.
And so, in 2019, we very quickly identified that behavior and started offering what we call commercial reviews, where if you've got a very good relationship with your agency and it's a high performing relationship, instead of the disruptive way of going to market, we would come in as an independent third party industry expert and look at all the commercial arrangements and write a scorecard report to show where that relationship sits and thereby avoid a pitch. Now, why avoid a pitch? It's disruptive, it's costly, and potentially you may end up with a new agency when you didn't
Mm.
need one and have to go through that whole onboarding again.
Yeah. And speaking as an agency owner, when clients that you have a great relationship with and you're doing great work for, kind of go, well, we've got to go out to tender. It's not a particularly nice feeling, right? I think you like to use the analogy of, the husband and the wife and, look, it's going well, but I might just go out to market for the next couple of weeks and see how things are. And, if I don't like
Exactly.
it, later I'll come back.
And look, many marketers will convince themselves that the incumbent knows their business and knows their marketing better, their brand better than any other agency. Unfortunately, the selection process in the way it's run is not beneficial to the incumbent because it's very much driven by what's new and
Mm.
exciting and interesting rather than what's well known and defined and comfortable. So, in the same way as going off and dating other people is not the best way to judge the strength of a marriage, pitching an incumbent who you have a very excellent, productive relationship with is not the best way because even if you appoint them, invariably there's been damage,
Yeah, I
either financial, emotional, or otherwise to that relationship.
think that's right. And there's not a digital campaign that we couldn't audit and find problems with, right? Whether that's an existing client or a prospective, it's just the nature of the space, right? I think it might be a kind of glib question, but as a marketer, why do I care? Why do I care about the pain that I'm inflicting on agencies? Why do I care if I'm costing agencies tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars to pitch? I'm a marketer in house sitting here. What's in it for me to do a lot of these things?
Okay, well, what I'd first say is it starts with the biggest mistake many marketers make when they go to pitch, and that is not spending enough time clearly defining for themselves what success looks like. Okay, because often marketers will find themselves going to market to just see what's out there. Let's go to market to see if there's something better without defining what better looks like. And so along the ways can lead to all sorts of problems. Now, if you want something better, you've got to be better as a marketer. And this is where the danger is. If you've not defined clearly what the outcome you're looking for, then often you'll send mixed messages to the agencies involved. And that's where we see a rise in perceptions from agencies that it was not a real pitch, that there was a preconceived outcome, that we're just being put through the paces to test the incumbent and they stayed with them anyway and wasted our time and that leads to marketers as individuals getting a reputation for having their favorite agency. And this is just and so it calls into question the ethical strength or the ethical ability of the marketer. It starts to create a poor reputation. And the impact of that is that you will not get the best agencies pitching for you.
Mm.
And I've seen it personally. I've seen marketers over the years who are known to have their favorite agency and will put a whole lot of agencies through a pitch process just to justify appointing their favorite agency, who will then not have the good agencies participate in that pitch because that's their reputation.
Mm.
Justified or not, if that's the reputation. The thing is, from a marketer's point of view, it sticks with the individual. It's not about the brand. When you change jobs, that reputation goes with you as an individual and can end up being a career limiting
Mm,
perception that hangs around you. I remember very early on having a marketer who, for no fault of their own, had a pitch go horribly wrong. And they were terrified of reproducing that subsequently
mm.
because they'd had feedback from people in the industry and within their own organization of the impact of that happening. You know, it's a real concern that I think most marketers overlook.
It's just true. Like I can definitely think of a person that we've dealt with where like it's very frustrating as an agency owner when you go through the process and the work gets awarded back to the incumbent when you have the feeling that it was always going to happen. And it was they went out to market to rubber stamp or to get some fresh ideas or to the point around procurement just to kind of just test the waters and make sure what we're getting kind of is kind of market. And we'll talk about feedback a little bit later on, and particularly when you don't get feedback, both positive and constructive. Because I think getting feedback, and if it's real, and particularly about why that your pitch didn't stack up against the winning kind of option, it does get really frustrating from the agency viewpoint.
And, it's not just the incumbent. When a new CMO or marketing leader comes to a role and then they run a pitch, and sure enough, they appoint the same agency again. And you feel like and the agencies legitimately feel that they were set up.
Mm,
Why didn't they just appoint the agency that they wanted to appoint without putting everyone through the cost and the disruption of pitching when they had no chance of winning? And so I think this is a very real issue and a real consideration for marketers on wanting to be seen to be highly professional, not just in the role of marketing, but in the role of procuring the right agency partners or the right agency, suppliers to that relationship and building good relationships. Because we know that's really where the best value comes from is when marketer and agency can work seamlessly together, and build a high level of trust. That's where you get more value than any amount of negotiation can deliver.
100%. I'd like to move on to the I guess the process, like RFPs, chemistry sessions. I can't recall the number, but there was basically, sorry, 45, I think, was in the report. Um, the most agencies that were engaged in one particular pitch process, which is completely terrifying, completely terrifying as an agency owner. Um, how many agencies do you get in at each stage? Just to hear from your perspective, and maybe this would be a good point to kind of look at best practice or best approaches when you're dealing with a reasonably small project in terms of monetary
Yeah.
value versus some bigger contract work.
Yeah, look, the 43 or 45 is particularly when procurement insist on going to open tender. So that's where there'll be some sort of advertised tender online, usually these days. Once upon a time, there was a tender section in the newspaper that every new business person would pour over. But yeah, there's usually an online tender process which everyone jumps into. Now, the first thing is if that's your filtering process, then you should make that as easy as possible for people to participate with capturing enough information that you can quickly filter from 45 down to half a dozen
Mm,
that you're then interested in. The actual number that should be involved is that let's think about the outcome. How many agencies do you want to appoint at the end? It's usually just one.
mm,
So if you start with 100 or 50 or even 20, you've got a long way to get to one. And what we say to people is, sure, look at the marketplace, look for who's available, who is possibly the best fit, and then quickly find the least uh, expensive way of getting that down to a handful that you can then go into deeper interrogation. Having said that, if I've got a client that has a project for somewhere between 50 and $100,000, the average pitch process as they're run, the type you were talking about with chemistry and credentials and doing speculative creative. An agency could be spending 50 to 150,000 or even more just participating in that pitch. So the fee is not even anywhere near enough to cover the cost of winning it.
Yeah.
So what would you recommend? There's so many things that could be done. You could just meet with 3 agencies and have their credentials and ask them to provide the contact details of, 3 clients that they currently work with and talk to those clients to see what each agency is like, and then appoint one to the project.
Yep.
There is no need to go any further than that. You've got a budget. You know how much there is to spend. You could simply do it that way.
The point around public tenders and capturing just enough information to filter to a meaningful number really resonates. We, as an agency, we don't respond to any tenders like that. So we'll be on certain lists and we don't respond because our feeling is it's just take a number and we're not willing to invest the money for the work because we kind of get enough work through other ways. So I look at that and go, but if we were required to put, generic bit of information about the agency, some rough commercials on how we approach things, and just a simple number of questions, collateral we probably already have, I'd be pretty open as an agency for us to respond to that. But often you're being asked to answer, 10, 20, 40 pages of pretty custom information,
Huh.
which takes days and days and days of a staff member's time.
And the most annoying thing is that every one is different. So it's not like you can just fill it in once and just supply it to everyone.
Yeah.
There's always different requirements. So
Right.
it really is bespoke for each one. The other problem is with that is that when clients are running pitches, like full on pitches, to just put an agency on a panel, they're not even being awarded a piece of business with a financial return. You're actually having to tender and go through the cost and time to then be included on a panel that could be anywhere between 3 and 20 different agencies
Yeah.
that may get work at some stage down the track. And again, that's a big investment for a very small chance of a return. So this is what we're talking about, is that there are so many different ways of meeting all the criteria. And the criteria for selecting any supplier, no matter how small or large, is to have a process that has governance and due diligence and is fair and delivers the appropriate outcome. They're the 4 main criteria that any process should do. There is no rule that says there is a particular way of running this. There's lots of different ways of running it. The problem is we find that marketers, of course, in this area don't know what they don't know. But what they do know is that a pitch is run this way, chemistry sessions and speculative creative and negotiations. And so they think that that's the only way to do it. So it becomes the go-to methodology. Whereas, we find ourselves, we certainly have some standards, but we're customizing the approach to meet the needs of each client and to minimize the harm that it does to the agencies.
Do you, because I think an interesting, another point, I think the potential reputational damage that a marketer does running a pitch in the wrong way is a really good one. Are you observing that sometimes what you might think to be a really good potential agency partner just doesn't engage with pitch processes if they're set up in the wrong way? Where if you've kind of, if you're boiling the ocean on a reasonably small project, expecting a whole bunch of hurdles to be jumped and the dog and pony show at the end of it, do you think that marketers are running the risk of actually not even having the best potential agency partners to respond to that process?
Look, it's a good question, because it leads to the observation about the rise of the independent agencies. We've seen in the last 5 to 10 years this huge expansion of independent agencies in the marketplace. Now, there's the traditional network agencies. They're largely run by people that are employees. They're employed to be the managing director of the office in this country. And so they have a mandate to win as much business as possible and take every opportunity. It's very different when you're dealing with independent agencies because the management, the owners, are actually on the ground in that office and increasingly are making value judgments on whether to participate or not
Mm,
on the basis of, is this going to be a fair process? Do we have a good opportunity to win? Will there be a reasonable return on investment if we are successful? And they're making those business decisions up front and not participating in pitches where they don't think it meets one or more of those criteria.
mm,
Okay. If you buy into a lot of these agencies, independent agencies are offering a valid, legitimate, and quite exciting alternative to the traditional network offering, that's what you're potentially missing out on by not running a process that gives them those opportunities. They are the ones that, even with a pitch consultant like Trinity P3, contacting those agencies, they will have more questions around, okay, what is the process?
mm,
How many agencies will be participating? What is the indication of the fee? They'll want that information so they can make a decision, a commercial decision and a legitimate decision around whether it's worth participating, because it's not just a financial cost. You can imagine what you would probably relate to the fact that if you, as an agency owner, put your team into a number of pitches that are unsuccessful, then you start to get a morale issue and you probably get a burnout issue because you don't have staff that are just sitting around waiting for
mm.
the pitch to come in. Almost everyone in your team is doing additional work outside of their paid work to actually make that happen. And you can imagine you win lose three or four on the trot.
Mm.
People are starting to become disenchanted. So you need to be much better as a business owner in making those calls and pitching more for the ones you can win. You've got a better chance of winning, and not pitching for the ones that you feel like you've just been included in the number. And I think that's a great, great thing.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, from our experience at Rocket, I think we're a really good agency. We do lots of really, really good work. Our resting position is we won't respond to RFPs, tenders, etc. That's our default position, unless there's a really compelling reason to do so. And so the types of questions where, yeah, I guess you're seeing agency owners ask are the types of questions that I'll be asking of my team, right? Which is, how did they hear of us? How many other agencies are involved? What is at stake? How many hurdles do we have to jump through? And yeah, I reckon 9 times out of 10, we just go, we're not interested because we're not going to go through that process to have, a sea of agencies competing, driven on cost, or the idea that it's going to go back to the incumbent agency. I do find that when you're talking about some smaller value work, where it might be just a bit more of an informal process, but still follows, all the steps to be a kind of a rigorous process. I really love just that agency credentials type session, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, just a chat. Let's have a chat. Let's see if largely there could be a fit here. And if there, and for me, that's not about them assessing us. It's about each party assessing the other. And often we'll say it's just not the kind of work that we're interested in following through. And so I think you do, as a marketer, potentially set yourself up for a lot of good agencies not really being interested in your process if you don't go about it in the right way.
Exactly. And over time, if you continue to do that, you'll start to get that reputation that will hang around you like a bad smell.
Right.
It does follow particular marketers. When they change jobs, the agencies are looking at the individual. It's very much a personal thing rather than a brand reputation impact. Yeah.
100%. Um, how do you, on a more complex pitch, right? I guess we've talked about it's a project, it's 50 grand, it's 100 grand. Probably you speak to some clients, assess work. It's almost a test, I guess, in some ways. What about for a much more, um, a larger account, potentially one of those more traditional accounts, billions of dollars, potentially multi-year? What is that approach that you think marketers should be taking to find the right agency partner?
Yeah, we personally don't encourage clients to go to speculative creative. We think that the pitch process is too abstract to actually use that as a way of proving the ability of the agency to deliver work. You can see the work they've done for other clients. You can see the results. You can get testimonials from their existing clients. We much prefer to use what we call workshopping or workshops, strategic workshops, where, on a big pitch, you do credentials, which are more about demonstrating their existing ability to deliver the capabilities required. A chemistry meeting where you get to discuss those capabilities, but really test out if this is a combination that can work well together. And in that, breaking down the idea that it's a presentation, having more people from the marketing side in those meetings so that you really do get a measure of how well there's an alignment of values and culture. Then going into a workshop where collectively you work on a problem for half a day, maybe 4 hours, sometimes a full day workshop. Now, the reason for that is it's as close to a test drive where you find out how the agency thinks and who are the people with the ideas and who are the people that can articulate them, but also for the agency to see how the marketer works. You know, is there a hierarchy? Are there some people that are more open to ideas than others? Yeah. So it really is, we call it the test drive, because both the agency and the client get a very good chance of finding out about each other. We've even in those workshops included, in the case of an automotive brand, we included like the dealers, representatives, the spare parts division, even the CEO of the company sat in on those 3 workshops with the 3 different agencies. And you got this collective view of which of those they thought would bring the most value to that relationship
Do you find,
without having to do work
yeah,
as much.
do you find that approach creates a more obvious winner? Like when you look at kind of when you've got 3 agencies just pitching an idea and creative and, the team spent hundreds of hours on it. Do you find that it's often harder to reach consensus in that environment versus when you do have key stakeholders spending half a day in a room with the people that would otherwise be doing the work with them?
Yeah, so we introduced that workshop approach in 2007. Prior to that, we saw often when creative was presented, they were no longer judging which agency was the best, but which idea was the best.
Mm,
And that becomes even more subjective. I mean, all of these decisions, James, are subjective.
mm.
Okay. But judging creative work comes down to almost personal taste. Whereas, chemistry and aligned values and cultures is something that is often collectively felt. So I'm not sure whether it's a clear winner, but there's usually people can articulate a clear preference in the workshop that will often not be seen when they're judging work. And here's the other thing about speculative creative work is you can never know as the marketer who actually did the work because a lot of agencies use freelancers, you know, and it could be the junior team or it could be a freelance team that actually did the work. You're also in that process seeing a pitch team, a presentation team who are very good at presenting, but you're not actually meeting the people that will most likely be working on your business because their skill set is how to present and woo a client rather than run a relationship from day to day. And so that's why we find the workshop. We actually had a workshop in the early days with an agency that was well known for being terrific at presenting and they failed miserably in the workshop because they spent the whole time presenting to the client rather than
About yourself.
working with them.
Yeah.
So it does have its strengths, and it's interesting. The marketers that at the start of it say, "Oh, 3 half days of but at the end say it was the best investment of their time, and likewise for the agencies. Now, that would only be used for, as you said in your inquiry, for a very large piece of business. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees per year over 3 to 5 years. There has to be a return on that investment.
But I guess it's the principles of, right, that should be able to be adapted and used in less expensive pitches, right?
Yeah.
And we
Well,
got
to your point earlier, you said, you like those chemistry sessions, but, they're not the word, I think we have to find a better word because chemistry sounds like, we get together for drinks or coffee and chit chat,
yeah.
It should be about business. The conversation should be about, this is what we do. How can we bring this to help you achieve your goals? And for the marketer to say, okay, that's what you do. How would you do it for us if we have these issues? And use the meeting as a way of finding where's their common ground and alignment to fulfill the predefined idea of what success looks like.
Mr. Woolley, I think if anyone can put a name or a label to rebrand the chemistry session into something else, it's you. And I see a blog post or a podcast coming soon on the topic.
Well, I hope so.
What paying for pitching?
Yeah, I the first thing out of the research is while a lot of marketers talk about it, very few are actually doing it.
Mm,
And if they are paying, they're paying a token amount. We're talking $10,000 or $5,000 to each unsuccessful agency. And in some cases, then asking the agency to assign their IP to them for the $5,000 or $10,000.
yeah.
And this is where I think the problem is. I, I personally, I recommend, and as a company, we recommend clients paying a substantial commercial fee if they are either wanting to own the intellectual property produced, and I'm talking, you know, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to each agency, or they have particularly rigorous and detailed requirements of the agency as part of the process. We want fully rendered videos and things, the things that you should never need. But if they want them, they should pay for them. The agency should not be out of pocket for anything that is unusual or specific to that client. I don't think a general payment of a fee for every pitch is a good thing because it starts leading to that idea of entitlement. I've paid you a fee.
And
What do I get out of it? I want your IP. I want this. I want this. Yeah. We have had situations where in the process, the workshops or something, and agencies come up with an idea that, or suggested something that wasn't ultimately the agency wasn't successful. And we've gone back and negotiated ownership of that for a commercial fee to actually buy the intellectual property. I don't know why this is not more common. Why do we have this approach that people have to own everything?
mm,
Just own what you need to, and everything else, is the product of the agency, working to win the business.
yeah,
So, but my baseline is yes, pitch fees should be paid in specific circumstances, but not as just a general practice, because I think it will lead to agencies becoming more abused than they are already.
yeah. Interesting perspective. What in terms of just timeframes, I think one of the um stats to come out was just agencies finding just not enough time to the process itself. Just, I guess, for a smaller process through to a larger one, how do you set it up in a way that you're actually giving the appropriate amount of time for the process to flesh out?
Yeah, look, and agencies are split on this as well. Some agencies like a fast process. It's like, yes, let us get our resources together and do a 4 week sprint and it's over and done with. Others say, no, we'd rather 2 to 3 months and have time, 2 to 4 weeks of each step as a way of being able to then, you know, maximize or optimize our resources to deliver to your needs.
Yeah.
Where agencies get really frustrated is when that process drags on and on and on. When we're getting to 6 months or even up to 12 months for a selection process, there's a huge amount of frustration from the agency's point of view. I think if you're going to run a very fast pitch, and we have run pitches in 4 weeks, But at the very start, you need to have that conversation with the agency and explain the process and explain the timings up front. Get them to agree or not. If they can't do it,
Mm.
accommodate as much as possible. But if not, then it may not be for them. Because there are situations where clients, through no fault of their own, or sometimes for a lot of fault of their own, have left it to the last minute. But you need to get agreement. You need to treat people as professionals and treat them with respect and get that agreement, and then run the process exactly how you've planned it, and not suddenly change it midstream, because you're asking them to do something extraordinary. At least be respectful enough to deliver your end of that bargain.
It's good feedback. We actually, when we're assessing what work we want to go in for, it's one of our big negative ticks, right? Is someone that comes to us needing something urgently, or needing to change agencies urgently, or needing responses turned around urgently. There's generally a pretty strict correlation between those types of prospective clients to pretty difficult clients to work with for whatever reason. And I think, to your point, maybe there's sometimes very valid reasons for that. But I think if you're going to get the best agencies to respond and to give their best response, front footing that and explaining away
Exactly.
the reason makes a lot of sense. And the other one's totally true, which is 9 times out of 10, all the dates that you get on a tender or an RFP are not met, right?
Yeah.
But always the expectation that your responses are in by the due date, or you won't be included to the next phase, and then often doesn't come back the other way, which can be very frustrating. I'd like to talk about feedback in terms of
Sure.
advice, and I think this does come back to, why should I care as a marketer, to the points we've already discussed, right? Reputation matters. I think it's about doing the right thing, and I think generally these things do come back around again. But how to give it, I think how detailed to go, and what the report says agencies are feeling out there.
Okay. So, the interesting thing is marketers often feel that they don't want to be the bearer of bad tidings, and they don't want to upset the agency. So the first thing is, we've recently heard from some agencies in a pitch that they were all told that they were a close second. Okay. That there is nothing worse than telling an agency that they're a close second.
It's
It's actually not.
music to my ears. It's that anytime we don't win a deal, that's what we hear. And every time I say to my team that are working on it, it's not true. I say,
Well, here's a line for you. Here's a line for you, James, and for every agency owner. When you're told you're a close second, turn to them and go, "This is not the Olympics. I'm not getting the silver medal." Because there is no silver medal. There's no bronze medal. You either win or you lose.
Correct.
And so, I'd say to marketers, never say they're a close second. It's you think you're soothing the pain, you're actually making it much worse, because then there'll be this process of post mortem in the agency going, "What could we have done better to be, to be one?" They'll never know. The other thing is that, the agency has had the professionalism to participate in this process. You need to have the professionalism to provide them with feedback that doesn't breach confidentiality of what the successful agency did, but gives them very practical things to think about next time. And that can be everything from, we thought that in the presentation, one person was leading too much and we didn't get the sense of being a team, or what others could, whatever it is, it's the sort of invaluable feedback that the agency can take on board. And, they may choose not to do anything about it because that's the way they work, but it's so valuable, and the type of thing that, in some ways agencies will feel like, well, okay, we didn't win, but, that was a really valuable lesson and we've got things that we can do for next time. I have seen very, very senior marketers, say to me, right, we're going to give feedback and we've got all these notes about all the things. And then we've got into the meeting and they spend 20 or 30 minutes going, "Oh, and you were really good." And, and they're
So
trying to,
close, so close.
yeah, But they've bought into that idea that, say 4 things nice before you say 1 thing bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, say one thing nice. Tell them, yes, we thought you were incredibly professional. There is nothing that would make us not want to consider you for future projects, whatever those things are. Be very clear. But here are some observations we made, and these are our impressions. But that's what we're basing our decision on. Where you could have improved, and then just go through them and have a very rational, grown-up conversation without getting into personal slurs and when the agency invariably asks, well, what did the other side do? Well, they did their thing. We're trying to give you feedback on what you could do better. It's
Mm.
not about the comparison.
Yeah,
And
100, like,
that's the advice.
hallelujah, for sure. Like, it's, we have a saying at Rocket, feedback is a gift, and it it's not uncommon to be completely ghosted, right? You kind of put all this time and effort in, you don't get any response, or you get "It was a very hard decision, you were a very close second, and you guys are so good at all this stuff, would love to consider you for few," and it's so frustrating. Never ever have we received detailed feedback, and has that done anything other than make us feel positive towards the experience? I think it also validates the entire process often, which is, and sometimes we get told who the winning agency is, and without, as you said, going into too much information or anything confidential, the elements of the approach that the client might have liked more about where they went, and then the things that you did actually do well, because it can be quite validating to know that, yeah,
Mm,
you actually built great rapport and we liked you and we thought you were excellent for these reasons.
of
But
course.
it's so helpful, and I think it's almost, depending obviously on the time and effort, often it kind of is almost enough to have made the whole process worthwhile at an agency, which is, we didn't win it, but we actually learned a lot about how we can win future work. But if you just get nothing, it is just mind-numbingly frustrating.
And the other problem is only giving feedback at the end of the process. you know, in that there's a procurement attitude that everyone, to create a level playing field, everyone should just get to run their race
Mm,
and then we'll make a decision. The trouble is that what that means, if an agency makes a small misstep
mm,
very early on and yet absolutely ideal, they've got no chance to correct it because there's no feedback.
mm,
There should be opportunities for feedback at each step of the way, not in a way that is going to make or give one a benefit over the others,
yeah,
but stops them being eliminated because of perhaps one misword or misinterpretation even.
yeah.
So I think, treat this as if you're building a business relationship. Start the pitch and run the pitch in the same way you would want to continue the relationship if it's successful, and that is with open communication.
Mm,
Be aware of not biasing a favor towards one agency over another, but give everyone the opportunity to be the best they can possibly be in that process, because you want to choose the right agency for you, and you need to make sure that the process itself is not getting in the way
mm,
of making that choice. And I think that's where, there's nuance in all of these, that people, often agency people will be on the agency side and participate in pitches, and they'll find themselves one day and they go, oh, I could run a pitch. There's a big learning curve from being in a pitch to actually running a pitch,
mm,
because, and I know I went through that myself,
mm.
25 years ago, changing from agency to pitch consultant. It's a big learning curve in understanding the two different perspectives and managing that.
Mm. Yeah, and it is so hard when you receive a brief or tender RFP, whatever it might be. It's often hard to know which, 'cause I think every prospective buyer has different things that they are more interested in. And often it can be hard to know exactly what to put forward when you have so much to talk about or so many areas to go down. So I think not being coached, but kind of being brought along for the journey and making sure that you are being given the best opportunity to put forward your true story, right? And not having things kind of not discussed that you actually can cover in quite good detail. Darren, it's been an awesome conversation. Any other advice for a marketer on how to run a successful pitch that we haven't covered today?
Well, I would say to every marketer, there are 100 considerations that you need to go through. We've actually detailed all of them on our website, because we know that a pitch consultant is not necessarily the solution for every marketer, but if every marketer could have the knowledge that we have, or the experience at their fingertips, that would be a really good thing to improve the pitch process. And so I'd say to them, take the time before you even start the pitch to really work through what are the important things, define success, who's going to be involved, how much time do we have, what do we really want to achieve out of that. Get that not just in their minds, but in get collective agreement on the marketing team side, or even the whole organization, before you even begin to engage with agencies. Yeah. Because it's so important. We are making uh, potentially big decisions here around the future success of the brand and the business, and getting it right is not something that you should leave to chance. There's always going to be unknowns, but the more you prepare for it, the better you'll be.
Love it. And the report itself is available on the Trinity P3 website. State of the pitch report, Trinity P3. We'll bring it up.
Yeah, it's trinityp3.com/state of the pitch, with hyphens between each one. We'll get you the report.
I'm impressed, Aaron, that you know the URL of the page. I was going to ask you on the kind of all the characteristics of a well-run pitch, which you said are on the website too, but I'm not going to probe you on that URL unless you're what's the
Not off the top of my head.
You will find it, or you can email myself. Darren, thanks so much for coming back onto the pod. Always love chatting marketing with you.
I always enjoy it. Thank you, James.